Okay, we have started recording and we are
I
going
have to
to
agree
be
to that.
interviewing Gary McLean.
Leave me, got it.
Okay,
You ready?
sure.
Wonderful. And it's October the 28th, 2024. And we just celebrated or recognized Gary's move to the status of High Priest Emeritus yesterday. I was privileged to be in attendance for that. So I'm just going to start with these list of questions that I'm trying to ask everybody the same thing. So we kind of have a form or a formula that we go through. So we'll start with you telling me about your religious upbringing.
So I was raised in London, Ontario, Canada, by the Thames River. And any of you who are history buffs will know the J.J. Cornish story of baptism in the Thames River in the winter, where they had to dig a hole in the ice. And after the baptism, this bright beam of light came and shone on them. So I grew up with that story as part of my background. My mother was the daughter of a self-sustaining missionary elder. His name was Fred Robbins. Um, she was born in New Westminster, British Columbia. She had actually 7 siblings. One died in infancy. But his second wife, my mother's mother, so my grandmother, died 6 months after her birth of a burst appendix.
Wow.
He could not take care of the kids, especially the young ones. So he farmed them out to relatives. So my mother had a growing up experience of moving really across Canada from relative to relative, not really knowing her father until she was older. And he did come and reclaim them as they were, I think, mid-teenagers. So I grew up with stories of my grandfather's experiences. My dad was raised Presbyterian, but was not really a churchgoer. But as I approached I guess my baptism, I was baptized at age 8. He started coming to church, but would always sit in the back of the church and would leave before church was over so he didn't have to talk to anybody. Um,
And that
so
was your father, right?
that was my father.
Okay.
I grew up basically with my grandmother raising me. My mother was a nurse and worked shifts, and so she wasn't really around to be with me during the daytime. Um, she and her husband, my grandfather, were United Church of Christ, but not really very involved in church. They did attend, but I wouldn't call them active by any means. And they lived just 2 blocks away. So um, I was very close with my grandmother, not so much with my grandfather. My dad actually was very active in Boy Scouts. And I think that also sort of helped him as he moved into activity with the church. He was baptized when I was maybe 10 years of age. Um, and then somehow he became very active. He died as an evangelist.
Wow.
My mother, as you heard yesterday, was an elder. Um, both of them extremely active in youth activities. They were my Zion's League leaders as I was a teenager. They were also very, very active in the cancer camp movement in Canada, which the church had a major role in. So I grew up seeing my parents, both of them, in leadership roles. We attended church on Sunday morning as well as Sunday school, and then church on Sunday night and prayer service on Wednesday night. I think sort of a traditional thing for people of my age. When I started to date, I dated only church girls. Again, that was the thing.
Expected.
Um, and there was always an expectation that I would go to Graceland, and I never questioned that. In Ontario at the time, we had grade 13, and so Graceland accepted that as my freshman year. So I went to Graceland as a sophomore. At the time, Graceland had just become a 4-year college, and their only major was religion. So there was not much question. I would return back home, live with my parents, and finish up university there.
Wonderful. Well, you had a very typical, I would say, for the RLDS church upbringing. I think I recognize and I identify with much of what you said as a youth and Zion's League and all the expectations. So you've probably already answered the second question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. Your first interaction with the RLDS, which it was at that time, church.
Well, obviously, I was involved with it. Not quite from the beginning. I was actually born in Sarnia. My dad was a sailor on the Great Lakes during the war.
Wow.
And so my mother lived in Sarnia, which was a port city. So every time he came into port, they could at least be together. I do remember being on one of his ships. Don't know if that's actually a memory or if it's a memory from a picture, but I do remember it. So I lived there till I was 3. And I don't think, well, my parents were were married in the church. So maybe they did have some church interaction in Sarnia. I don't remember it.
Okay.
My earliest recollection would be going to Sunday school. It was in a house right next to the church, which was sort of interesting, and I do remember that. So,
Okay. And the same congregation, was this in Ontario then, once you began attending
so
regularly?
well, in London, got to get my dates straight. There was only one church. It was the Maitland Street Church. During my growing up years, um, my dad actually moved to become pastor of the Apple Valley. No, that's wrong city.
That's
Bridges
you.
Street, the Bridges Street congregation. And my sister and I went out there with him and my mother. Maitland Street wanted him back as a pastor. We had already become quite entrenched in the Bridges Street congregation. I was already playing the piano. That's where our youth activities were. So my sister and I stayed at Bridges Street. And at that point, I was able to drive. I think I was 17 and drove my sister back and forth. So, um, and by the time I left London, we actually had 4 congregations there.
It almost sounds like your father became interested in the church after your baptism.
Yes,
Okay. And then became very active, it sounds like.
extremely active. He was I think he was district president, and
Yeah.
he,
You
he
followed
was
right in his footsteps. So,
always active in leadership roles, as was my mother, except that, of course, when I was growing up, those opportunities were limited.
exactly. Well, do you have one or two special testimonies of God's influence or blessings in your life that are, I'm sure you have many, but do you have a couple that might be outstanding to share?
Where will I go with this? Well, one, of course, was when I was at Graceland. As you might guess, I was a nerd, and I was a nerd at Graceland as well. And Graceland did not have fraternities, but they had social clubs. And the social club that I chose to participate with was called ZIP, Zionic and Participation. And it was a group of nerds. And most of us were international. There were two other Canadians. I don't know if you knew Bill Gunlock. He
Yes.
was the one of two US. We had a couple of Tahitians, both of whom went under church appointment. Um, and it was an amazing bonding experience for all of us, and it was bonded by our commitment to the church and our studying together, and our we would go to a congregation to put on church services. Um, and it was a real blessing. I actually, one of the other Canadians I visited in Newfoundland this past a year ago, when we took a cruise to
Wow.
Newfoundland, and it was amazing. It was like we had never been separated, and I hadn't seen him in 60 years.
Isn't that
Uh,
amazing?
so it really was amazing, and it was I think an experience that most people would not affirm. But for me, it was extremely meaningful, and a really spirit-filled experience to be with this group of guys. Um, I think another experience I would share is in Apple Valley, when we chose to create this planned community. We didn't know what we were doing. It was an experiment. We tried to learn from Harvest Hills, but Harvest Hills was quite different from what we were. And during that time together, um, it was a wonderful experience. As pastor, um, I had experiences with priesthood calls um, that were very meaningful. I had experiences with fellowship services that were also very meaningful. It was a wonderful experience. After church yesterday, our family went out to eat, and even then, the kids were saying how wonderful their childhood had been, and how blessed they were to have had the La Paz, which is the name of our neighborhood, experience. And it was truly wonderful. Not to say there weren't problems, because there were, but it was also a great experience.
So that, when did that originate, the community around Apple Valley there, around the
Excuse me here, I
congregation?
gotta close this.
Accept. Decline.
Sorry. Um, we moved into our home in Apple Valley in 1972. So that's when the neighborhood began.
Okay.
The church, I think, so we donated the land for the church. And
Your family.
no, the community.
Okay, the neighborhood. Mhm.
We bought 51 acres as a group, and we gave 3 acres to the church. We
So it was
designed.
not really developed in that area when you
No.
began.
It was hilly and wooded and just beginning to develop. There were times when we couldn't even get home because the roads were so muddy, we couldn't get past them. So they weren't paved. It was all mud and gravel and so on. Yeah, so about 1980 is when I'd have to check records, but I think that's about when the church was dedicated.
Well, I know it was here long before I moved to Minnesota, but still more of the gymnasium at that time.
Well, so that was part of the controversy.
Oh,
It was built intentionally to be only a multi-purpose room.
okay.
As part of our study about this gathered community, we became very aware of stewardship. And at that time, we were also aware of climate change. So we were way ahead of the curve on that one.
Yes.
And you may remember that it was built as an underground building.
Yes.
It was built into a hill.
Right.
So that was for energy conservation. And we believe that it was not good stewardship to build a sanctuary that would be used once a week.
Uh,
So we did not want a sanctuary. All of the leadership of the congregation at that time were in agreement with what the congregation wanted to do. And so there was never any intent to build. Oh, I'm sorry about this.
that's okay.
Find.
Becky, can you stop
Plus
the
one nine
recording?
five two 993.
Pause the recording. I will do that right now.
Share screen.
Okay, we'll continue.
So the leadership was really focused on stewardship and taking care of the land and taking care of energy and the climate. We had I should maybe not get into names here, but we had a deacon who was strongly opposed to this approach. And he would take down the basketball hoops so the kids couldn't play in the gymnasium. So we'd have to keep going back and putting it up, and he'd keep taking them down.
Wow.
And obviously, if you go there now, you know that there was a sentiment, certainly of a majority of people who felt like a gymnasium could not be worshiped in.
Hmm.
And that's why they have now this large sanctuary that gets used once a week. So, yeah, so, but it was a wonderful experience at the time when things were going well.
Well, and there came a time also in the late 80s, maybe mid to mid 90s, when many churches just were growing in membership, and I'm sure that Apple Valley was one of them. And so buildings were expanded, and not just in our denomination, but all over. And
But
boy, do we see that a
doesn't fit
decline of
Apple.
that now.
That doesn't fit Apple Valley.
Oh, really?
We were growing like crazy when we had just the gymnasium. It wasn't unusual for us to have over 120 people at church on a Sunday morning. It was a big congregation. As things deteriorated within the congregation, and that began about 1982, 83. attendance fell way down. And now I understand they run up maybe 35 on a Sunday morning. They
And
did
again,
not need this, they did not need the sanctuary because of numbers. They
okay.
needed it because they lost sight of what it means to worship. Now, that's obviously my biased opinion. I think you can worship anywhere. You
I,
don't need
I,
a sanctuary to do it.
I agree. If you ever saw where Red Wing worships, we are in a storefront next to a tanning salon. We share a building, a
Yeah.
mustard yellow building behind the pizza, Domino's Pizza, but
And you can worship there, right?
absolutely do. Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful worship. Okay, well, I'll ask our next question. What do you think is important for Community of Christ to do now as a church?
You know, Becky, we've spent so much time on this question and keep coming up blank.
I'm hoping in these interviews that we just come up with some marvelous explosion of ideas.
Well, somehow we have to change the image that we have. And I know that we thought that was going to happen with the change in the name of the church. And I think that has been a very positive thing to have done. But it's not enough alone. I think first we have to get back to the idea of what it means to be a church. And that's partly from our conversation we just had. We've got to stop thinking about church as needing to be in a building.
Yes.
We've got to stop thinking about church as being numbers. We don't need large numbers.
Yeah.
We need to truly believe that where two or three are gathered together, God is there. I personally believe that our message has to be a social gospel message. And that means a lot of what we're doing in St. Paul now, the social community outreach, involvement in the community. I think we have dramatically changed our image in that neighborhood, but it hasn't resulted in numbers, nor does it necessarily need to. We are serving, and that's what's important. Tom and I have talked ever since, I can't remember, certainly back into the early 80s, about selling the St. Paul Church.
Yeah.
And really embracing the concept of God's presence everywhere. And so we meet in homes. We don't even need to go to a Y or to a storefront. We just meet in homes. That never caught on with anyone beyond Tom and me. But I still believe that's where we need to be. We need to stop worrying about numbers. So ordination of women. So we lost a third of our membership. So what? We probably needed to. I haven't heard of the same kind of numbers with the LGBTQ affirmation, but if we do, so what? We have got to be willing to embrace where God is leading us, whether or not that results in a loss in numbers. I think it's really interesting that our next president is going to be a woman. And what's that going to mean to the church? I don't know. but we did it. And I hope we're going to do the same thing with the country.
We certainly have that choice coming up, right?
You do.
And I agree with you. So here's another question that might be along the same lines. How do you think we can share the gospel with others? And is that what we should be doing?
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we do it verbally. Um, and I don't think the gospel means the community of Christ theology. Marilee and a friend of hers in this building, one Friday a month, goes into probably the deepest hood in the city and hands out sandwiches and a lunch, as
Good for
well as
them.
now they're handing out winter clothing that people in our building have donated. Well, that's sharing the gospel.
Yes.
I shared with you the fact that I'm now almost daily visiting with an inmate of the correctional institution,
Right.
a Black man who I knew before he went into jail. And I'm the only pastor that he knows that he feels comfortable talking with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do that every other day at least. And that's sharing the gospel, even though I don't say anything about community of Christ.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's how we do it. The fact that we let our building be used by the Girl Scouts, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if is AA still meeting there?
I don't know about that or about the exercise group that met
Yeah.
there. And I'm guessing they still do. And it also sounds like the pollinator garden might be a draw to some people around the area that are interested in that. Along with working, I think, with another denomination, another church, is it St. Mark's? That goes
Yes.
into the wildlife area there also. So yeah, I
And
think St.
and the
Paul
food shell.
and the food pantry.
You know, none of those things is going to result, I don't think, in membership, but it's living the gospel.
Exactly. Okay.
And that's
And you
what
know
we have.
what? You just said it. Living the gospel,
Yep, yep,
not just sharing, but living it.
right.
So, we could have 3 hours worth of discussion on this. I do have two more questions, but so I hate to get off of that topic, but I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Can you tell me who do you feel was most influential in your religious life?
Well, certainly my parents. Um, there was an elder in our congregation in London, Ontario. He was actually a butcher, but he was a wonderful, wonderful preacher. And at least that was my perception at the time. And when I was first called to the priesthood, he kind of took me under his wing. He took me with him on priesthood visits. After every sermon, he'd give me a written critique. Um,
Wow.
it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, he later became a professor at Graceland, um, and became part of the rather radical left wing of the faculty. He was part of the group that founded and published Courage magazine. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that.
It was a wonderful publication that really was pushing the church to move into directions that it was being too cautious to move into. And then he later left the church because he just got so frustrated with the
Wow.
church's lack of response. Another person who was very influential was Dr. Evan Shute. Does that name mean anything to you?
No.
Well, Dr. Shute was a leading proponent of the benefits of vitamin E.
Ah,
He was actually kicked out of the US AMA because of his promoting vitamin D. They thought that was a sham thing. Well, of course, we know today that did I say D? E, vitamin E.
E,
The
yes,
vitamin E is critical. We have
right.
to have vitamin E. So what he was proposing way back then is now fully endorsed by the AMA. But he was a leading researcher and physician in Canada. And at his age, he was probably in his mid 60s. We would play tennis every week. I would have been 16, 17, and he would run me ragged.
Ah,
We were pretty close in terms of score, but he would be as fresh as could be when we were done, and I would be exhausted. And then
wow.
we go get a Coke and we talk. And he was also a very liberal thinker in the church, but very committed. He actually rewrote the Book of Mormon in modern English,
Really?
and the church totally threw that out.
Oh,
Um,
so
so
is there a copy kept anywhere to your knowledge?
boy, I've never seen one. I have no idea.
Okay,
But you can
interesting.
hear that I was influenced pretty heavily with forward thinking
Yes,
ministers in the church, and they
yes.
became my models.
Can you spell Dr. Schute's last name?
Shute.
Okay.
He had a brother named Wilford. Um, I kind of had a thing for his daughter, but they lived in Ottawa, so I never saw them very much. But he was also a partner with Evan in the research on vitamin E.
Interesting. Well, as I say, I could go on forever and ever. My last actual question that we'll have in this recording is, what is most important for others to know about you?
That I have a deep abiding faith. And I think that's often questioned because my ideas seem so radical to people, but they're radical because I believe that that's what God is calling us to be. And when you look at the life of Jesus,
Oh,
how could
it's
anyone be
radical.
more radical than Jesus was?
That's very true, Gary. Very true.
So, and when people were leaving the church, and my first wife left the church, I continued. I brought all the kids from Apple Valley to St. Paul every Sunday to go to church. Um, that's always been my commitment.
And that is, I'm just going to give my own little opinion here. What we're missing so much is that deep faith. And we just see so many leaving that I don't know, it got firmly implanted in you, that's for sure. And we are blessed because of it, that's for sure as well. Again, I could continue this conversation forever, and maybe I should be like that inmate you talk to every other day and give you a call and just get
Well,
filled up.
just to react to your last comment, I don't think it's faith that's missing. I think it's the willingness to act out in radical ways.
Hmm.
I mean, I think we're seeing some of that in St. Paul. I mean, a
Oh,
pollinator garden. Who would think that a church would do that? And
or
if
that
we
it would make a difference.
don't protect the bees, we're done.
Yes,
Who's going to do the pollinating?
exactly.
I mean, that's radical, and we've done it. And so I think that's the piece for me that's missing is moving out on that faith and being willing to be radical and do the things that we need to do to save our planet.
I'm going to stop our recording on that note, but ask you not to move away yet, quite yet. But I'm going to go ahead and end the recording at this moment. And thank you so much, so much. I'm going to ask you to give me a list of more people that we need to talk to for these recordings, but I'm going to end the recording now.